Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness. And Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about masculinity. Obviously, I am not a man, so I can only speak from my female perspective. But thankfully, we have Donovan here to offer his male perspective on the matter of masculinity. So, Donovan, why don't you kick us off? And what are your initial thoughts when it comes to masculinity?
Yeah, so I was actually thinking maybe you could open up the topic with the topic that we were just talking about, like the issue we were just talking about, and then we can open the conversation from there.
Sure. Yeah. So in recent news, probably by the time this gets released 2 weeks after the fact, but in recent news, what just happened this past weekend at the Oscars was that Chris Rock told, if I think everyone knows, but for those people who aren't up to date with what's going on in the celebrity world, Chris Rock told a joke about Will Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, and it did not go over lightly. Will Smith got very emotional and reactive and just basically got up on stage and smacked Chris Rock in the face just there and then. And then he went back to his seat and then screamed, "Keep my wife's effing name out of your effing mouth," or something to that effect. So clearly there's a lot to like dissect about that incident. And, you know, I personally was just sharing with Donovan that I feel divided on an individual basis because I love Will Smith. He is, since the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but also his journey. I know he released his book. I didn't read his book. That's on my to read list. But I watched his mini docuseries about writing his book and his weight loss journey. And it really just opened up like a more authentic side of him that I didn't realize in the struggles that he's been through, in that he actually has, abuse in his family. His father had beat his mother, and he like developed all this like guilt and issues from that because he felt like he couldn't protect his mother, and so he felt like a failure. And so, he's a real human being, and I love that he's being authentic. And part of me was like, oh, he's standing up for his wife. I think that's great. Maybe not the best way to conduct himself to do that, but I think it's, from a woman's perspective, I'm like, yeah, I want a man to stand up for me. But at the same time, I'm like, do I want it to be a physical slap? Or, I'm like, I don't know what else he could do. I'm kind of at a loss in that. So that's where I'm at. But a lot of people are saying, violence is never the answer. And I agree with that. It's not a good solution. It kind of like tarnished Will Smith's reputation, which I'm sad about. And that's where I'll start. Give the overview of what's going on.
Yeah, so I think there's two major threads that we can pull on here.
Yeah.
One is sort of the event that happened in terms of sort of Will's perspective, right? The perspective of, I feel like my family is under attack or under threat and I need to defend them. Right. And sort of how that fits for him as a person in his journey and whatnot. And then I feel like there's like a more generic piece around sort of like how should one respond in a situation like this or act in a situation like this. I'm going to start and hone in on that piece.
Yeah.
So for me, the context of the situation makes a big difference, right? Mm-hmm. And if you have someone who is a comedian on stage,
right,
saying anything really,
true.
There has to be, or in my mind, there should be some space given around like, there is a good chance that some number of things that come out are going to be offensive in some way, in some light, whatever else. Is a show with millions of people watching, the actual time to sort of step out and make that confrontation. Now, I personally don't think that makes sense, right? Because given the broader scope of what's going on and sort of the history, or like if you look at just anytime a comedian is presenting anything or telling something that's meant to be a joke, there's often an offensive element, but it's not meant as something like a personal attack, right? It's not meant to tarnish. It wasn't meant to bring down or tarnish or ruin the reputation of his significant other, right? It's maybe in bad taste, maybe not a great joke, maybe not the most funny thing possible, but to take sort of that baseline and have that reaction, I just don't think makes sense, right? It's just not going to be useful. I'll take it back to that, right? When I go back to what is going to be most useful,
right?
Not that, right? That reaction is not the most useful thing.
Yeah.
Now, I also understand how, going back to like the masculinity piece, I understand how, as a man, you could get caught up in what feels like an attack on someone that you care about, and get so caught up in those emotions that you feel like some sort of a physical response is warranted, right? I get how all those emotions could bubble up, and you could have that feeling, and if it's strong enough, not really know what's going on and just act on it,
right?
But I still don't think it's useful. I still don't think it's a useful action, because it's not going to serve you in the long term. It's not going to serve your family in the long term, right? Like,
right.
The repercussions, I feel, are going to mostly be negative. Now, he also got super lucky, as far as I know, in the sense that he's not facing any criminal charges or anything like that, right? In general, you do something like this,
any charges,
right?
Yeah.
But in general, if you have this sort of reaction, you are going to face long-term consequences, right? And if you have a family and you do something like this, some sort of like physical outburst, and you end up in jail, that's not going to serve them. So to me, I think I'm pretty firmly on the position of what I feel like is the right move. But even if he wanted to make some sort of in the moment, like opposition or confrontation, a verbal one would have had the same effect without all the legal implications.
Yeah, so he could have like screamed something at Chris to be like, shut the F up or something to that effect.
Right. And still, I would think that's super inappropriate. It's just like if you're at a comedy show, if you and I were at a comedy show and they made some sort of offensive joke towards some particular group that one of us is a part of, or made fun of, like, if we brought our significant others and they make fun of our significant other right there while we're sitting there, is it appropriate to go up and punch them or hit them?
Yeah.
No. So, changing the scenario a bit and the players a bit, like, it just doesn't make sense.
I do want to kind of, offer, like, because I absolutely 100% get where you're coming from, and it makes sense. And like, again, there's that part of me that agrees completely with you, but then there's this other part of me that's like saying, when people are emotional, they're not thinking like, oh, what would be the most useful thing to do right now? Like, before they like act and they react, and they're not thinking about like what's appropriate and what's not okay and what's okay. And they just do. And, not to say that's okay. It does take a lot of personal development to develop enough awareness to take a pause, slow down, get that you're reacting. When you're reacting, a lot of us don't do things that we should be doing, essentially. And so, I want to give Will some like grace and space that, he is a human being. And, I get that he was emotional. I'm sure like emotions were really high end based on everything going on. But the other counterpoint that I wanted to make was that, like, yes, if I was at a comedy club and someone was like especially for one, if someone was disrespecting someone that I love, it's one thing if it's happening to me, I'm like, whatever, I don't care, blow it off. They're an idiot kind of a thing. But it's like, I get where Will's coming from, because if someone's like hurting someone that I love, or significantly disrespecting them, my urge to smack someone would most likely come up. Would I actually go through with it? Probably not, because I generally don't smack people, but have I thought about it? 100%. Like, that's happened. But the other thing is like, what was coming to my mind, it's like, yes, the thought of smacking someone would absolutely cross my mind, but it's like, whether I would act on it or not, I mean, it's unlikely that it would happen, but I think there would be a difference if it was someone that was a complete stranger, like a stranger comedian speaking up on stage. Yeah, I think I would have like, I don't know who this is. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know us. He's just being a whatever. But if it was like someone that I knew, that I have a lot of history with, that I would actually maybe think like, actually, I don't know, they might, I don't know if this dialogue would happen in my head. I know him enough that, and we have like a history enough that I could get away with smacking him and there wouldn't be any dire consequences like going off to jail. Then maybe I would. I don't know. But Chris Rock and Will Smith actually go way back to, he was a guest star on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and he played a woman like that was supposed to date Will, and it was like a bit. But there's also, I think they have like history, but Chris Rock had soiled, like, even before that event this past Sunday at the Oscars of 2022, like, Chris had made fun of his wife back in, I did a lot of research. I was like so engaged by this Will Smith thing. I think it was 2017 that Chris Rock had also made another joke about Jada for boycotting the Oscars. And so I think maybe it was like built up tension from that. And it was just like, it was that other comment, like, it was the final straw that broke the camel's back kind of a thing. So those are my additional thoughts to the point you made.
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely something to be said for, going back a bit.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the humanity of the action, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, absolutely, it's clear to me that in a similar situation, any number of people could have gotten caught up in it, right? Even the example, the side example we gave of like being in a comedy show, like, if the comedian started ripping into someone in my family or my significant other or something, I would probably get mad.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
how I act and reacted is a different thing. But still, like, I could get caught up in it enough that I could get caught up in the urge to actually hit someone and try to do it.
Like, hypothetical, like, what if that comedian was like your uncle that has always been ripping on your significant other for years, and it just was like, like, how would that change things for you?
I feel like the public context makes it very poor timing to act, right? Some people might say, hey, you stand up for your person in front of a bunch of other people, and that makes you look stronger. But to me, I think since in this exact example we're talking about, most people don't have the context. Most people are not going to know, like, oh, that's my uncle that I just went up there and punched in the face in the middle of the show. Most people are going to be like, what is this? Like, what is this guy doing?
Yeah.
Right. So again, very easy to see the human side where it's possible to get caught up this way. Right. But is it the right move? I still don't think so.
True. What if it was like you were in a room privately together?
I think in that case, it makes much more sense to have some sort of confrontation immediately.
Yeah.
Now, should that be physical? Probably not. That doesn't do anything useful. I feel like it's like a reaction that a lot of, especially men, have to raise the stakes physically in some way. Yeah. But you're still not likely to get the outcome you want, right? Which is to say that if I'm talking to somebody in a room privately, they say something rude about someone I care about or love, I punch them in the face. The most likely outcome is not that they're going to be like, oh, I must have been wrong in this situation, and now I'm not going to speak like that. The most likely outcome is that they recover and try to punch me in the face, right? And then we've escalated the conflict, and depending on how that goes, like we could get to the point where the relationship is not recoverable or someone is seriously injured. So
Yes.
almost regardless of the situation, the reason that I don't think bringing violence in makes sense is because you start walking down a path of escalation instead of doing the thing that you are hoping to do. Now, there is another situation where that's not necessarily true, which is if you or someone around you is in imminent physical danger, right?
Oh, yeah,
Like
definitely.
if someone is threatening, right? That's not what happened in the scenario we're talking about. But if someone is threatening you or someone you care about, then I feel like in those instances, there's more nuanced decision around the use of violence and whatnot. But even then, in most scenarios, I would think that leaving is preferable to starting an altercation. Again, the context makes a huge amount of difference.
Right.
But in general, just introducing violence into any situation, especially between like two men, I don't know about women, I don't know enough. But between two men, it's just more likely to escalate things more. And this is how you have things like people who get in an argument at a grocery store over some random item they're trying to pick up and someone gets shot. Like that's how these things evolve, is because someone shoves someone has a gun on them, they get shoved, they feel like they're under threat, they pull out the gun, and like just not worth it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think there is something to be said about, violence just typically tends to escalate more violence, and that's not the pattern that we want to promote, because it's like that is leading to a very unhealthy way of coping. If that's your go-to. And there's a lot of work. I know for me, even though I've never gotten in a physical altercation, I've definitely been in verbal ones, and even that is a response to heightened emotions. And I know if we're in a heightened emotional state, we'll say things that we don't mean or that could be hurtful. Even though they're not physically hurtful, they can be very emotionally hurtful. And especially if it's like your significant other or family member, that can stick with you for a while and be held against you for a long while. And so it has taken me a lot of like training and self-awareness and personal development to be able to pause, slow down, recognize that I'm reactive. And sometimes I do have to stop and just leave the room, because anything that I say right now is not going to be helpful, and I know it. So I need to just step away, cool off, breathe. I'm not like abandoning you. I'm not walking away from this relationship. I just need to cool down so we can be in a better space mentally. And probably he does too. So we can actually communicate and like get really real and understand each other on a better level. Because that's the other thing. When you're in reactive state, you're not really in a understanding state. It's like, Will Smith, he is a comedian. He is a actor. He's a musician. He's all sorts of things. And he's been around comedians for who knows how long, plenty of comedians. And he knows that's their job, and he knows that that's what they do. But even then, it didn't stop what happened ultimately in front of millions of people on live TV. So, I do appreciate one thing. He did apologize like the next day. And I thought like the apology was just really well written, and he ended it with, I'm a work in progress. And I thought that was just like a beautiful way to end it, because that is the nature of our own development, and being able to come in touch with our own emotions and learning to emotionally regulate ourselves in a way that it doesn't result in hurting people, whether that's physically or verbally.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to what we've been talking about, which is on a human level.
Yeah.
I very much understand that, right? He is a person. He almost definitely got caught up in the moment and made an action. The only reason I don't want to extend that too far is because it's the kind of behavior that if you exhibit as an individual, is very likely to get you in trouble. There's another thing
Definitely.
that I sort of thought of as we were talking, which is, as a man, when you are in situations like that where physical violence starts, if
Mhm.
you are with other people, it is also very likely to start like a chain of violence, right? And
Mhm.
for example, the details are sort of sparse, but like I was at a bar one time and someone just shoved me almost completely out of the blue.
Mm.
And then within seconds, like before I even had any idea what was going on, my friends were there like pushing that guy. His friends showed up and started like pushing my friends, right? And
Wow.
we were able to sort of like de-escalate that so that it didn't evolve into a full on brawl. But um another problem with using violence in as a man against other men in these sort of environments is that it can quickly spiral out of control, right? It
Mhm.
could have very easily, that situation could have very easily ended in my friend fighting one of his friends in a way that like caused serious damage to one or both of them.
Mhm.
So that's just another aspect. I did have a question for you though, because I know sometimes men feel that they have to protect themselves physically, and by protect I don't mean like I'm
Mhm.
under physical attack, but like basically show that they're not weak
Yeah.
through often acts of physical violence. So I'm
Mhm.
curious if there's any sort of pressure like that whatsoever, as a woman, or like how, or if you've seen sort of what I'm talking about.
I I know it exists, but I don't think there's nearly that pressure. At least from my own personal experience, to act in a physically way when there's altercations. I don't feel like I need. I guess maybe I do feel the need to show that I am strong, and I'm not gonna put up with shit. But I know I don't have to resort to physical means to be able to do that. And I do feel like that is quite the privilege that I get in that. um Maybe my upbringing, or just how I've been shaped into a woman, is that, like, yeah, I know that doesn't have to happen, but I can still be strong. I could still protect the people that I love. But I think there's that protection mechanism that happens, but it's to a different degree. But I also realize that, you know, and this is something I'd like to bounce off you for your thoughts, is that, you know, I have always felt that it's really unfortunate that men don't get the permission to express their emotions to the full degree. Like, the only emotion that they are allowed and granted from a societal cultural stance is anger. And anger comes with violence a lot of that time. They don't get to like feel sad or worried or these other things that are just part of the spectrum of just being a human being. And also the other side of it is that men, because like if you show your emotions, if you cry, you're shown as weak, and you can't do that. The other side of it is, I don't think men also get the training, because they're kind of like shoving their emotions away or not learning to deal with those emotions because it's not allowed from a cultural stance. Then they don't learn how to regulate their emotions and respond to them in a healthier way. And it's like, I can't speak for men, obviously, but I do think it's so much harder for men because of like the stereotypes and how society expects men to be a man. You don't show feelings. Feelings are weak. And in reality, it's just part of being human. And there's a way to deal with your emotions in a healthy way, and there's a way to deal with it in an unhealthy way. And so, uh, you know, I give I give men more compassion and understanding, because I get um that it's not part of their upbringing or how they're raised, and it's kind of becomes a part of their identity. But That doesn't mean I say like, hey, that gives you permission to like beat up people or shoot a school, that's not okay. And I think we just as society need to be better about giving men space to have their emotions for one, and be better at like letting them be trained in learning how to deal with their emotions. Cause every time I say this, like every time I hear about like some man shooting up shooting their spouse or their girlfriend, or a teenage boy shooting up a school because they got rejected. I mean, oh man, we could totally get into the whole like Kanye West and Kim Kardashian breakup. He is not handling that well, and he's being like abusive. That works me up. It's just like men don't know how to deal with rejection because they don't know how to deal with difficult emotions. This is a generalization. This does not apply to every man. I know plenty of men that have emotionally developed themselves, but from a general stance, that seems to be the case.
So there are a couple pieces that came to mind while you were speaking about this. First, I think there's two parts in terms of one. I think you're correct that emotional sort of expression and regulation at a more general level is not something that's prioritized for men, right?
Mhm.
There are less outlets of expression or less ways to develop generally, right? Like you said, obviously there are individual cases where people are really in tune with their emotions and able to regulate and whatnot. I think there is another piece that maybe isn't as clear, but as a man, I know that one, like I have more urges towards physical violence in times that I am feeling frustrated, right? I don't know if that's something common for you, but I know, for example, if I feel slighted or I feel like under threat in any way, whether that's just verbal or physical or whatever else, I sort of feel like a more heightened sense of like, I want to act on this physically. And I don't know if that's true for every man. I don't know if that's, super common, but I am under the impression that it is more common for men than it is for women. So, for example, there was a time somewhat recently I was out like walking around in the city, and a homeless person with a dog asked me for money, and I just said, I don't have any cash on me, which is true. I didn't have any cash on me.
Yeah.
And then he started like just yelling into me like, I don't need to hear all that bullshit, man. Just like fuck off, like all this stuff. And I felt like in my body tense up, like are we about to have a fight right now? Like, are we gonna fight over this? This is the stupidest thing. And obviously, like, I didn't act on that. I didn't do anything, whatever. But that was an emotion and sort of like an impulse, right? It wasn't like the impulse to do violence, right? But it was something like in my body around like, oh, I kind of need to be prepared for this in case it does escalate, because it might. It's the kind of like verbal altercation that can ramp up really quickly. Anyway, so the reason I bring up all that is because I think for a lot of guys, it's a natural, like, or a more natural impulse. And then when you pair that with the lack of sort of expression in other ways or other forms of regulation or whatever else, you can find a lot of guys who quickly move into that mode because that tool is one of the only ones that they've ever used. So they end up using it or giving into those impulses across a range of things where it's not appropriate at all, right? Oh, I felt disappointed. Okay, well, the only tool that I really know is to get super mad. And then when I get mad, I start feeling these impulses towards physical violence. And in the worst cases, those come out in ways that are terrible. So for me, it's kind of the pairing of the two things. And I can't say my experience works for everyone, but I feel like I've known enough and seen enough men and experiences to know that, most men seem to be calibrated somewhere on that spectrum higher than most women.
I probably concur with that. I mean, the impulse to, I think when I think about the impulse to hit someone or be violent, it's usually in the scenario of like I feel like maybe they might want to hit me for one. Then it's like that agitated like excited state in a way. But then, or when they're, I did mention that, the urge to smack someone if they're if they're kind of hurting someone that I care about, that has happened. But otherwise, I don't feel like it's not a normal impulse. I think like I'm more likely, it depends on where, if you had met me maybe like 10 years ago, my impulse would just like be avoid, run away. But now that I feel like I've developed myself, which I don't know if this is better or worse, but I think my impulse, if there was like an altercation, instead of running away, I do, maybe because of everything that I've been through, my own lived experience, that I wouldn't hit them, but I think the most likely thing I would do now is like curse them out and scream at them. Probably, to be honest, that is probably what happens, unless I'm in enough of a like emotionally regulated state to be able to step back in that moment and pause and actually talk calmly, because I have been able to do that on occasion, and that's a magical thing when you can do that, where you can like, someone screaming at you and you want to like just scream back. It really takes something to just be like, hey, you know, remember, it's not, probably not, has nothing to do with you. It's probably all over there with them. And just remembering that, be like, hey, you seem really upset right now. What's really going on with you? Like, that takes something. But otherwise, I think my natural instinct though would be probably just to scream and yell back, but not hit them unless I felt like they were planning to hit me, which I can't even remember scenarios of that happening, honestly.
Yeah. So as you talk about that, I'm kind of thinking, and this may not be different, but it strikes me that it could be different, which is whenever I'm having a verbal altercation with a man, and I
Mhm.
guess technically also women, but definitely with men, I feel like I need to be prepared at any moment for it to become a physical altercation. And I don't
Mhm.
know if that threat of
Mhm.
violence feels the same. Like I know objectively, right? Like men fighting women is not going to go well for the woman, but as far as like socially and what is likely to happen, I feel like, going back to that story of just, that homeless guy kind of yelling at me,
Yeah,
like it wasn't so much that I wanted that to become a physical altercation,
of
but
course.
I feel like I have to be prepared for that
Mhm.
because it is possible as a man that another man is going to escalate that. And I don't know. I have no idea if as a woman you feel that as often or if it's as much of a threat. Obviously, there are threatening situations,
Yeah.
but yeah, go ahead.
I think there's another thing that like, oh, that is, I think is a common woman experience, is that I don't think we're necessarily fearing like being attacked, but more, well, no, it is, we do have fears of being attacked, very much so, but more like raped and shit like that. So not like, oh, getting into a bar fight kind of a thing doesn't seem realistic in my mind, but like getting raped is, it seems like a real possibility if I'm like running at night in the dark by myself. Like someone could come out and it could be a scary situation. So in those moments, I feel like I need to be on alert. I need to like, I have learned self-defense. I know how to use my elbows, knee to the crotch, all the things that you can do where it is an acceptable response to have a because it's in as a means of self-defense. But I guess it's just a different context, because I guess I'm just not connecting to the idea of someone wanting to like have a physical altercation with me, just because it just doesn't happen. But someone wanting to like rape me, I think that's just a common fear that a women have generally.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Like there's physical threats, but they're different.
Yeah.
It also reminded me of another thing that's sort of weird that I've heard of, but um, I've heard that there's guys that are either like really tall and bulky or just like really bulky or
Hmm.
muscular or whatever else
Hmm.
that will have a number of random guys try to fight them just
Oh
for
my
no
God.
reason.
I have friends like that. Actually, I do. I have, I actually did, I might have mentioned this in our last podcast episode with Xander, where we're talking about masculinity, where I have like a 6'6" like Black man friend who actually hosted masculinity events with me back in DC. And he was telling me like how he has to smile all the time because otherwise everyone thinks that people want to kill him. But then I also have this other friend, which is a really unfortunate reality because I think I must have mentioned this. It's like, I have my resting bitch face, but nobody thinks I'm going to kill them. I realize that's a privilege that people don't generally fear me when I'm just like spacing off. I don't remember. I mean, he's probably had the experience where people might have wanted to try to fight him, but he's such a sweet person. But, if you were just basing off like physical appearances, that could happen. But I did have a friend that had confirmed exactly that, who's, he's a big, muscular, tatted up guy, bald shaved head. He's in a heavy metal band. He's like a singer in the band. So he looks very scary. But if you know him, he is a teddy bear and he's a sweetheart and such an amazing human being, my friend Bobby. And he's told me where like he's at a bar and just like people, because he's like the biggest guy in the room, or because he's like a big muscular guy who can like bench press like 200, 300 pounds. I don't know how much he can bench press, but gonna do a lot. He lifts like a lot. He's got like giant muscles, but people approach him frequently. And I'm like, I can't even imagine that experience. Nobody has just like come up to me wanting to fight to prove themselves. It's like, that's such a surreal experience, but I know that happens to him. Rare, actually not, it's not that uncommon for that to happen to him, which is weird.
Yeah, it's a really weird dynamic that I don't quite understand. I mean, I guess it's got to be the guys that are feeling those sort of violent impulses that I talked about, but towards the end of the spectrum, right? The higher end of like, or maybe the top end of like, oh, I need to prove myself. I need to inflict some violence on this person. Like, I'm just going to do it. I mean, it's like that experience I talked about at the bar. Like, I have no idea what happened. This guy just came out of nowhere and just like full on shoved me. Like, and I never got the context for that. I never got the details. I never got any reason as to why that happened, because we got kicked out and went separate ways. And obviously I'm not going to spend the time to go back and be like, what the hell, man? Like, what is this? Mm-hmm. But I do feel like it's something that you constantly sort of have to be aware of.
I think it might come down. Well, I don't know. This is just like my guess, is that it has something to do with like proving their power and their dominance, very much like dogs. My dog Jax will do. He always has to be the top dog. I mean, we dog sit once in a while, but I don't feel comfortable bringing in a dog bigger than him, because then he feels extra threatened. And you can tell that his hairs spike up and he's in like ready to fight mode. So I think it's almost similar to the dog experience of like, I need to prove my dominance. I'm the top dog to some men, probably. And I think it really comes from actually fear and insecurity. Yeah, that's my opinion.
I think, and I was going to mention this earlier, but that's part of the reason that I am able to give space for people who overreact and give and have some sort of, violent outburst that's like moderated, right? Like if going back to the Will Smith thing, like if he just went up there and just beat the shit out of Chris Rock, like that would have been a whole separate issue.
Yeah.
But I think there are probably historical evolutionary reasons that men are predisposed to violence or like these impulses in certain ways. But that's also why, I would say like, this is not what's useful anymore, right? Just because like you have those impulses, just because it's like,
right.
Oh, my biology says that I have to prove that I'm, the strongest person here, because that's what's most likely to get me mates in many years ago. Yeah. Right. Like it's just no longer true. So that's why I feel more strongly, going back to our original conversation, that like, this is not the right thing to do. This is not what's going to be useful. And, while you can understand it because it feeds into sort of these natural impulses, like we also have a ton of other natural impulses that are not useful either. So that's why I come down pretty hard on that side. But absolutely, like, it's something that you see in like other animals. And I am sure that's why you see the same sorts of behavior exhibited in people. It's just that those are outdated sets of instructions.
Right. Yes. We are, it is maybe like a primitive response, but we also are intellectual. So we don't have to use our emotional brain, the amygdala. We can use our prefrontal cortex, but it is infinitely harder when you're reacting and feeling threatened or feeling like someone's hurting someone else that you care about.
Yeah. And I will just add, I feel like it is justified when the threat you're facing is physical in nature, right?
Yeah.
If there is an imminent, like, something's going to happen, absolutely. Sure. But in the majority of cases these days, and you know, in the example we talked about, like, that's not an imminent physical threat, right? If someone says something you don't like, escalating to physical force is not worth it.
Right. Yeah. And that's actually one of the things, because that same night, Will Smith won Best Actor for playing King Richard, Serena and Venus's Williams' father, basically. And King Richard, the actual King Richard, said he doesn't condone violence unless it's an act of self-defense, which I think is really the only exception. And I do agree that's the most appropriate time, really. And hopefully it doesn't have to resort to that. But you know, that's the reality sometimes for some people.
Yep, definitely. Like I said before, if you can leave the situation, I think that's still preferable. I know there are certain communities and places where not standing up for yourself can actually be a big problem. But in general, it's if it's people you're never going to see again, if it doesn't have any impact or bearing on your long-term life, like it's not worth it.
Yeah. Oh, and the other exception, if you're like boxing in like a real boxing and then you also have protective gear where it's like expected that you punch people in the face. Or I don't know if you're allowed to punch people in the face in boxing. I don't know. I know you could punch them everywhere, like anywhere.
No, not everywhere, but definitely in the face.
The face. Oh man. Yeah, I guess that's appropriate, but you know, I don't necessarily recommend it for everyone because concussions, not cool. But anyways, all right, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Any final thoughts?
No, that's pretty much covers it. Just the main thing I want to get across is, like, you know, while you might feel compelled to escalate things, and I've been there before, and I've been the instigator of these things before, but it just isn't worth it. Like, it's just old wiring coming up to try to get you to do things that could have been useful a long time ago, but now will only hurt you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. We appreciate you supporting us and spreading happiness in the world. If you have some thoughts about the Will Smith event or masculinity or violence, be sure to put that in the comments and like, subscribe, comment, all the things that help spread the happiness in the world. And we will see you next time. Bye, guys.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.